So to continue our theme of creationism in public schools, we have two more speakers. Lauri Lebo probably needs no introduction to most of you. She covered the Dover trial and wrote a book about it called The Devil in Dover. And I had the pleasure of serving on a science education panel with Lauri and several other people at the first PlastaCon 2 years ago. Our other speaker is Ed Brayton, who writes the very popular blog, Dispatches from the Culture Wars. So please welcome Lauri Lebo and Ed Brayton.
Hi there. Ed and I are going to sort of, I said it's going to be sort of bluegrass style. We're going to lean in. So bear with us on that. First of all, I want to thank Dave for his awesome work on this, because I was a reporter for many, many years, and so I left reporting, and I still miss it every day. But to see the work that sometimes I get jaded, and to see great reporting is always makes me have hope for the profession I love so much. So. I said a nice thing about him, and he didn't hear this. I'm talking about him up here, and I'm going to keep on going and just keep saying nice things about Dave until he notices that I'm talking about him. I was thanking you for the awesome job you did.
Oh, thank you.
So anyway, okay. So it has been. It was, and this is hard for me to believe. 10 years ago, 2004. There was. Was when the Dover School Board decided that they were going to force religion into science class by inserting intelligent design into the curriculum. And as we know, it was the first time that that had ever happened in a formal way in a public school. So, and I was a reporter at the time, and I didn't know much about science at the time. I was I was an education reporter. And so I became fascinated by this story from the very beginning and sort of learned as I went on what was happening. And I got to know Ed through coverage of this, and Ed's role is a little bit different. So,
my role, although I was a reporter as well, but not at the time, my role in this was I was part of a group of people who were behind the Pandas Thumb blog, which is a blog dedicated to the evolution creationism debate. I'm sorry, can you not hear? And the National Center for Science Education was consulting on the trial with the attorneys, and Nick Matsky was their point man here in Pennsylvania, working with the attorneys in that case, and he put together this group of people that were analyzing everything. So as the expert witnesses for the other side submitted their reports, as the depositions were done, they would send those along to a group of about 20 of us, and we would go through it and look for holes and suggest strategy and suggest how you question them on the stand and so forth. And so that was the role that I played in there. It was a pretty minor role, certainly not as big as Lauri's, who was there in the courtroom every single day covering the trial.
and everybody, I think, pretty much knows how this story turned out. So, breathtaking humanity. And that's Margaret Talbot's article that she wrote for the New Yorker. And yes, as the reporter who was in the room, I couldn't believe that I was getting paid every day to run into the courtroom and learn about all this stuff, because as Margaret Talbot wrote, it was the biology class you wish you could have taken. So, let's see, we kicked, intelligent design was utterly defeated at the time, and as we know, the Discovery Institute had whined that Judge Jones, it was okay to rule that against the school board on their behavior, and that they shouldn't have, what they had done was not constitutionally correct. But what what they also won was that he had ruled on intelligent design, that it was actually revamped creationism. And they didn't feel that was fair, except for the fact that they had made that a central part of their argument, and they had essentially, the lawyers with the Thomas More Law Center had asked Judge Jones to rule. They had incorporated that into the trial, and so that's why that was ruled. And as you know, intelligent design was basically ruined that day. I mean, as an out-and-out open argument was pretty much destroyed at the time.
And that's where a lot of the changes have come in since then. Of course, creationism evolves in response to its environment, particularly its legal environment. So what's happened since then has been really interesting. There have been, and Dave talked a little bit about this, there have been two primary types of bills that have been submitted around the country since the Dover trial, and none of them mention intelligent design at all. And of course, intelligent design was created so that it didn't mention creation science at all, because the Supreme Court had said you can't do that. So they keep getting smaller and smaller. So there's basically two types of bills that we've seen submitted. One is to require teachers to teach the strengths and weaknesses, or the evidence for and against evolution, which is kind of it's a distinction without difference. Right? I mean, intelligent design really is nothing but a set of bad arguments against evolution. And so when they say teach the arguments for and against evolution, what they're really saying is teach intelligent design. The second type of bill is the type that Dave just mentioned, which is the academic freedom bills. The Discovery Institute actually has a model legislation on their website that has been submitted all over the country. In fact, it's been submitted, I think, 51 times, 53 times since 2004, and 40 times since 2008, which was when the Discovery Institute put out their model legislation. Now, the good news is it's only passed once.
Tennessee?
I didn't count Tennessee.
Okay.
Louisiana and Tennessee here, it's twice, out of 53 times. So it hasn't gone very far. And I know that in Michigan, where I'm from, the Republicans took over the state legislature in 2010, State House. And Michigan Citizens for Science, which is a group I helped found, I sent an email to the rest of the board saying, okay, folks, saddle up again. Because that's where all the creationism bills have come from for 10 years. And we haven't seen a single one. And so that's been a big surprise to us. But while they've been pretty aggressive in putting in the legislation, I think mostly for purposes of political pandering. See, I'm standing up for God, I put this bill in. There doesn't seem to be much action on it, which is really good news.
And the one thing I'm starting to find interesting, and I'll talk about that on what's happening in Ohio a little bit in a bit, but I'm having trouble now, and maybe you are too, Ed, is when I read the sample legislation, they keep tweaking and tweaking it, and as you said, they're watering it down and watering it down. The one, was it the South Carolina one that just came out? I couldn't tell, it seemed like it was really good science. It was, the standards that they were suggesting was really good, you know, and it's like, it's almost like they're going full circle. But somewhere, and I'm not sure where these, you know, because they have to, they can't stand up, you know, for their faith anymore because it won't pass the Constitution. So they keep watering it down over here.
Although what we see happening, and I should have mentioned that too, another type of bill we see is the critical analysis.
Yes.
And they don't mention evolution, usually they don't mention anything specific, but we have to teach kids to critically analyze, which of course is a great idea. Of course we should teach kids to critically analyze things. But what happens is, even though the bill doesn't have that specific language in there, what almost inevitably happens, and this is to our enormous advantage, is that the legislator, or if it's a school board, when they do this sort of thing, they can't stop talking about it in God language. So when they're talking to the media, even though the Discovery Institute usually swoops in and says, don't say anything about this. The Dover School Board did the same thing, but by the time the Discovery Institute had gotten there and told them, you know, don't talk about creationism, don't talk about God, by that time it was too late. Because they saw themselves as standing up for God, and they wanted their constituents to see them as standing up for God.
It's hard when it's all a nod and a wink, you know, they gotta, in case you didn't understand what I was saying. So, by the way, I took that picture, that was the September 12th rally, Glenn Beck. So the reason why I use that is because it was after the Dover trial that I thought, well, now that was a blow for sanity. I thought we were a blow, that was a victory for sanity. And I thought that things, especially when President Obama was elected and saying that he was going to be very strong on science, I thought things were going to change. And I'm always so shocked how naive I was at that time, because then this all happened. And as I say, that I took this picture, and that woman was very proud of her sign, and she was happy for me to take that picture. So just the idea that things were going to turn around, then the idea that the kids, you know, that after Kitzmiller, things we're gonna have sound science education, just really revealed to me just how naive I was.
To be fair, the sign doesn't say education.
But it does say something about our reading standards and our spelling standards. So, okay, so what's happening now? In addition to the academic freedom bills, And it's really hard to keep up with all the attacks on science, or on education right now, because it's coming from so many different directions. And one of the things we're starting to see now too, of course, is Common Core. And Common Core, all it is basically a set of standards for reading and math that, that each state agrees that they will use. And of course, we're starting to see a lot of people freak out over this, including Tony Perkins. If Obamacare, he loves that, by the way, Obamacare is allowed to take control of America's educational system, I foresee a nation where children are indoctrinated with a liberal ideology that celebrates sexual perversion, worships the creation rather than the creator, all at the expense of academic achievement and our nation's Christian heritage.
He means that as a criticism?
It used to be a stand-up comedian, by the way. So what's going on here? I mean, other than the fact that if they can pin something on President Obama, they're going to. But what else is going on? And, oops, 10 minutes. So one thing that I find really interesting is that they're trying to use this to attack science education too, even though Common Core right now is for reading and math. And as you saw, I guess it's House Bill 537 in Ohio that was just introduced.
597.
I'm sorry?
597.
597, I'm sorry. Yes, I apologize. Yes, to repeal Common Core, but which again inserts language in that does the critical analysis kind of thing. And you guys now, Ohio is sort of back 12 years or 10 years ago, fighting the same critical analysis bills that the Discovery Institute was trying to push into your curriculum, back then. So they're using Common Core to attack science education. They're going to try to slip that in, it looks like. So very interesting case that's going on right now. Okay, so what else is going on? Well, in addition to Common Core, in addition to the academic freedom language, we're also seeing, let's just get rid of public education. If we can kill, and by the way, yes, that's a real photo. Did everybody see that photo of Governor Corbett? He really did that when he signed his bill in June. So Governor Corbett, with his first budget, he cut $1 billion from public education. He's been strangling public education. And by the way, that's the reason why education is the #1 issue in this gubernatorial election right now, because the public understands that, which is good news. But in addition to that, we know he tried to push through vouchers, because vouchers are a great way for private and Christian schools, religious schools, to get their hands on all that good tax dollars. And charter schools. Right now, he's been pushing, what he did was he cut reimbursement from the state for the schools of charter schools. So public school districts now have to cover all the costs of the charter schools in their district for each student who goes there. And that's happening across the country too. And the problem with this is, and Ed's going to talk a little bit more about this, but is that in a lot of cases, these charter schools are sneaking religion into their classrooms, and it makes it, and they're doing it without tax dollars. And one of the things that's really concerning about that is with each student one of the things that's very concerning about that is the issue of standing. Because charter schools, the students have a choice on whether to go to those schools or not. However, so if they choose to do that and they go to a school that's teaching creationism in science class, are they going to be the one to stand up and say, no, wait a minute, no, I'm fine with this, because they chose to go to this school that is where this creationism is being taught. So it raises issues of who is going to have standing and who could actually sue to stop this using our tax dollars to teach creationism. Ed?
Yeah, so legally, charter schools are exactly like public schools. They have to be the exact same standards. In terms of the First Amendment, the Establishment Clause applies to charter schools just like it does to a public school. But as she said, because these are people who chose to go to a charter school that is sponsored by a religious organization, nobody's going to complain about this. And so they can sneak creationism in there, and they have. There is a large charter school system called Responsive Education Solutions. They have 17,000 students enrolled in 65 campuses in Texas, Arkansas, and Indiana that we've found out recently was teaching creationism in there. And this chart shows all the schools, the charter schools and public schools that we know are teaching creationism.
Louisiana, Tennessee.
Yeah, Louisiana and Tennessee are big ones. The ones in green, let's see, the ones in green are places where the states where they allow creationism to be taught. That's Louisiana and Tennessee primarily. The ones in yellow are private schools that teach creationism while receiving public money through things like vouchers. And the red are charter schools that we know are teaching creationism, primarily that responsible education solutions.
And the other thing to remember about charter schools is that they can they must be a nonprofit. However, they can be run by for-profit management companies. So how else are schools? While this is all going on at the national level, how are schools doing this individually?
One of the ways that they do this is through school assemblies, and they get some friendly principal or superintendent to invite them in to give an assembly. The assembly might ostensibly be about self-respect and resisting peer pressure and that sort of thing. Really what they are is sermons. And we've seen this all around the country, including some of them teaching about creationism. Sometimes it's called an anti-drug message, that sort of thing. Like there's a group called Life Choices that puts on these assemblies all over the country. And it's they dress it up as a talk about self-respect and meeting life goals. It's basically a sermon that they give. They talk about Columbine and how they were martyrs for Christ at Columbine, which is a myth. There's another one called Decisions, Choices, and Options. There's somebody's about teen pregnancy, but they're really just abstinence and anti-abortion. This guy, I love this guy. It's my favorite picture ever. Justin Lookadoo. He's a motivational speaker who claims to have given assemblies in front of 2 million students here in the United States. I don't know whether that's accurate or not, but that's what he claims. He gives seminars to teenagers on how to be dateable. And he actually has a website, areyoudateable.com. And part of the advice, like he tells teenage girls, for instance, that the way to be dateable is to shut up and let the man take charge. Things like this. Now, the good news is that about 3 months ago, Justin Lookadoo was arrested, being found in his car, passed out, drunk, and with vomit all over himself. So I'm guessing that's going to cut into his career just a little bit.
All right, so what can we do? What can we all do in the room to fight that? All right, one of the things, and I should mention this, I left newspaper reporting, I'm now with Pennsylvania State Education Association. I work for the Teachers Union, that's an affiliate of National Education Association. But Josh Rosenau, who is definitely ground zero of these fights and with the NCSE, has said, when a teacher calls NCSE for help fending off pressure from administrators who want to see this, he says, how's your union? We need to support our teachers' unions because they are on the front lines on these. And in these 3 cases, for instance, it was the teachers who were the first ones who stood up, and they declined to read the statement with the help of their PSEA staff person who worked with them to craft their statement that why they would not be doing it. Susan Epperson in Epperson v. Arkansas, she was responding to her teachers' union request for someone to do this, and both the AFT and NEA did file amicus briefs in Edwards versus Economic. So there is a tradition of the teachers' unions stand up for public education, and they do defend science education. So that is very important. And of course, we all play a role in this also, and Ed's going to talk about things that we can do with your individual school district. But before we do, the importance of being the people who actually do stand up. That's Susan Epperson in that, and it was right after in 1968 when the Supreme Court ruled that you cannot outlaw the teaching of evolution, and that's with her. We met her for lunch that day. Is John Stokes.
And here's where I contradict Lauri a bit. Now, none of them in terms of teachers' unions have been great at this. The problem is individual teachers often are the ones trying to put creationism into classrooms. And we know from surveys of public school science teachers that this is happening fairly regularly. 2008 survey of science teachers found that 12 to 13% are actively teaching creationism. And that about 1/3 face real pressure from parents in particular to water down the teaching of evolution and bring in creationism. I worked at the Michigan Science Teachers Association convention probably 8 years ago and talked to a whole bunch of teachers who said, it's just too controversial. You know, I talk about change over time, but I don't mention the E word. Because every time I do, I get inundated with angry phone calls and letters. So we know that there are a lot of teachers out there who are teaching creationism. The problem is, we never find out about it unless somebody complains, a student or a teacher. And that just doesn't happen very often. Even if they have an objection to it, the backlash that they get from their local community if they were to go and file a lawsuit and put their name on it is such that it sort of encourages them not to rock the boat. So how can we find out when creationism is being taught? And here we have a little homework for you all. We can find out through Freedom of Information Act laws and open records laws, which exist in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. You can send a request to your local school district saying, I want to see all the material used in your science questions. And not just the textbooks. Ask for supplemental handouts, because that's usually the way they get the creationism in there. Ask for DVDs they might show. And probably 10 or 15% of the time, if you file those requests, you're going to find that they are, in fact, using these supplemental materials. So it's important to ask for everything. Now, there's a group called the National Freedom of Information Coalition, or NFOIC. And if you go to their website, which is nfoic.org, and there's a list of some of the resources here, you can link to every single state law on this. They will have a sample letter that you can use to send out to them. If you find out that your local school district is teaching creationism, contact the ACLU, Americans United, FFRF, the American Humanist Association. If you have a Citizens for Science organization in your state, you can contact them. Get the word out, and they will send a letter. And you don't necessarily have to go file a suit after this. In fact, if you don't have a child in that school, you don't have standing to file a suit in those cases. But just getting the letter is often enough to scare the school board or the administrator into making sure that's not done anymore, because they don't want to face a lawsuit. So that is your homework, and next year we want to see the results.
And of course, one thing is just how important it is to stand up and fight the good fight, because it was the parents in the Dover case that were the ones who ultimately killed intelligent design as a out in the open concept. And by the way, we have one of the plaintiffs here, Cindy Sneed. She's in the back of the room, and she was one of the plaintiffs in the Dover trial. She was one of the parents.
Thank you, Ed and Lauri. We have time for maybe two brief questions.
Just to harken back a few years back to the 50s, when I was in high school, I wasn't able to take biology because of a clash of schedule. But I took physics and I took chemistry and everything. So I never took biology. But I went to other institutions where I had an interest, such as the museum, Carnegie Museum System, and to the Buell Planetarium and Science Center. And I was wondering, what factor do you think those organizations play in this? Because certainly public education is important, but there are other organizations that bolster science. Are they weak or strong today? Or are they being inundated also? Hard question.
Not really my area of expertise, actually, so I don't have an answer to that, unfortunately.
Yeah, you had mentioned that you had to have a student in the school district to have standing. Is that for the FOIA request, or is that just for a lawsuit?
No, anybody can file a FOIA request. You don't even necessarily have to be in that school district to file a FOIA request.
Okay.
But if you were to actually try to file a lawsuit, The courts have been very picky about this standing issue, which, by the way, is complete nonsense. It's nowhere in the Constitution. It's an entirely artificial thing. In order to file, you have to have a child in that school district.
I have more of a statement than a question, and a little more homework. When David said that don't get even, get busy, the fundamentalists put people and they run candidates for the school board, okay? If you really, really want to make a difference, run for your local school board, or at least show up to the meetings, okay?
Quick close look at it. If you see the bio in the program, part of my bio says that I'm pretty sure I'm the only person ever to make fun of Chuck Norris on C-SPAN. That happened during a speech in which that was the subject. I was encouraging scientifically literate people to run for school boards. In the late 1980s, the Christian Coalition shifted their strategy. After Pat Robertson lost in the 1988 presidential race, they shifted their strategy to the local level, and they ran, in the next 10 years or so, like 15,000 people for local school boards. And a lot of them won and got on. That's why we see this kind of thing, like what happened in Dover, because they have stacked school boards with those people. So he's absolutely right. If we're going to get active in this, that's one way to do it.
If I may. And also, I deal with school boards all the time, and I deal with teachers all the time. So I see what's happening. And I think right now is a ripe time, because we know, in Pennsylvania, because we do know that, as we know, Governor Corbett's approval ratings are abysmal right now. But I think there's a fatigue. There was this idea that we'll get a lot of Tea Party candidates were going to get on the school board and they were going to change things. And I think we're starting to see just how destructive that has been to so many of our school districts. And I think the time really is right for us to now push back on that.